Thank you very much, all of you, for coming today. I think it's going to be a really enriching discussion, and I think you're going to hear a variety of viewpoints and have some really great information to take back to your organizations and to consider what your role can be as an employee who's a proponent of positive mental wellness in your workplace. I'm Jodi Butts. I'm the Executive Director of Rise Asset Development. At Rise, we provide supported entrepreneurship services to men and women with a history of mental health and addiction. So we help people build businesses, and we do that with low-interest small business loans, free training, and mentorship. I'm also a lawyer by training, so I'm very pleased to be here at Norton Rose, hopefully among some of my fellow Law Society members, and just a brief word to say, it's really amazing watching how the profession is really progressing on these issues. It was great to see Orlando Da Silva win both a Law Society Treasurer's Medal, as well as being a recipient of one of the Transforming Lives Awards from the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, all on the same day. So that was really heartening, because I've been a member of the bar for 16 years now, and it wasn't always thus. If I can just leave it at that. So lots of progress there, and celebrate that. So as I mentioned, we're joined by some really fantastic panelists, and I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves, maybe starting with Karen on the end.
Good morning, or good afternoon now, I should say. It's great to be here. My name is Karen Jackson. I'm with Excellence Canada, Senior Advisor with Excellence Canada, and I'm very pleased to be part of this panel today.
And I'm Paula Allen. I'm with Morneau Shepell. I'm the Vice President of Research and Integrative Solutions.
I'm Sarah Hilton from Stressed Out Solutions, otherwise known as SOS.
Hi, everyone. Also thrilled to be here this afternoon to talk about this very compelling topic. I'm Jennifer Elia from Sun Life. I lead the client experience team delivering health and wellness as well as absence and disability management consulting to our clients.
Hi there, my name's Cynthia Hastings-James. I'm co-founder of a company called Cooks and James Loyalty, and we do a health behavior change platform called BestLifeRewarded.
And I'm Addie Greco-Sanchez, also thrilled to be here. I'm with AGS Rehab Solutions. I'm the president, and we're a disability management company helping people to return to work.
Great. So Katie and Healthy Minds Canada has convened us all to talk about wellness, metrics in action. It's such a great title, by the way. And so I'm going to throw out the first question to the panel, which is really why measure your mental wellness program, and if a company is reluctant to actually engage in that, maybe happy to implement a standard, but are somewhat reluctant to put some numbers around it, what would you say to them?
Well, I think it's important for an organization that might be a little bit reluctant maybe to get started is to not see it as overwhelming, that you do bit by bit. Start with your policy and make little successes and reward yourself as you're going. And also to see the importance of the link of wellness, including mental health, to strategically to your organization's managing of people, your human capital management, and your people practices, and the importance of linking the two together and within engagement, so that wellness and engagement are aligned. And there's lots of evidence to show that organizations that have high engagement levels also have have reduced stress and less absenteeism. So making that strategic link for organizations and the importance of it.
So I'll just reiterate that because conceptually it's very clear that what Karen said is quite true in terms of the link between engagement, productivity, wellness, mental health. But organizations, when they actually see the correlation in their own numbers, then they really start to get it. and understanding where the organization is, what divisions, what groups might be having more challenges than others is an important insight if there's going to be any strategy, but also to understand where you might have emerging risk, because the measurement isn't a one-time thing. It's at the beginning of a program, it's throughout the life cycle of the organization, because one's improvement, if there is improvement, doesn't necessarily change unless one's eye is continuously on the ball and you understand where things are going on an ongoing basis.
I'll just add to that as well. One of the things that we find at Stressed Out Solutions is that at the beginning, yes, there might be some reluctance, but as some of those metrics are looked at and we look deeper into the outcomes, people get excited about those. And so when the excitement and the champions are on board in that organization, more strategic planning can be done, continued discussions and conversations can happen. So I think at the beginning, it might be overwhelming, as Karen mentioned. There might be people in your organization that are reluctant to really look at the metrics and look at what programming could help them moving forward. But once you get a couple of champions, you can go anywhere with that, and those champions help you do that.
Thanks, Sarah. I think what I would add along similar theme is it can be very simple, and you don't have to do it alone. So if the reluctance does tie to being intimidated around the concept of measurement, look inside the organization, what data points are already collected in human resources. And if you're a partner of an organization looking to wellness, to measure their strategy, you can look to even other partners. It can be a collaborative effort where there doesn't need to be necessarily a territorial or siloed effect, but rather have the organization and various partners working together to bring together all different data streams, whether it's health and wellness program participation information. If there are online pieces, what are the click-through rates, for example, of material? What are your benefits trends, your drug and absence trends look like? Engagement scores, absenteeism from more of a casual perspective. So connecting all of those dots, it doesn't have to be done in isolation. It very much can be a partnership approach.
Just a quick comment on that. I think it really can be potentially scary, especially in particular with mental well-being and exploring and that data and looking into metrics. But I think an important consideration is that we don't necessarily need to have all the solutions. It's really about learning and understanding what some of the needs and gaps are. And then with things like technology, you can start to experiment and trying to provide supportive solutions. But it's really trying to gain that understanding of the population to figure out ways to potentially address those gaps.
Just to give you a little bit of context, AGS Rehab was one of 40 organizations chosen by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the psychological health and safety standard. So we've been followed for the last 3 years to help us through with some researchers to actually implement the standard. And the great benefit of that is that we had no choice but to start measurement. So in your question, Jodi, regarding to metrics and why, it wasn't something we really wanted to do, especially as a small company with very limited resources, but I can tell you that there's a huge advantage to doing that. You can't manage what you can't measure, and unless you start with having some metrics around what is it that you want to achieve, as was mentioned earlier, tying it to your strategic plan and then looking at where it is that you want to be so that you can really make a difference, not only for your organization and your bottom line, but for the lives of your employees.
So I think we're hearing some really interesting things there out of all of these great responses. So one is, this is not a siloed exercise, and it's really about strategically linking it to the organization. So it's not necessarily just adding something to your list, it's about growing and achieving better understanding of what you're already trying to achieve and what might be some hidden obstacles to your doing that. I think the other interesting thing is sometimes when we think about metrics and organizationally, and certainly not to be stereotypical, but maybe in this district of the city as much as any, it's not about winning, right? It's not about hitting our targets or blasting through them or, doing those kinds of things. It's for sure it's about making progress, but it's also about understanding. And the reality is if you're going to go to all the trouble, what I'm hearing, to put the standard in place to not then measure really is just foreclosing a really great opportunity to better understand your teams and your ability to get better on a number of fronts. I think also really, really importantly, and I would like to pick up on this, and I appreciated everyone's comments about this, you don't have to do it alone, right? So it's not about sitting within your four walls and trying to figure this out. There's lots of great collaborators there who will walk on this journey with you. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be super complicated. And it's something you're going to do throughout the cycle, like what you said, Paula, there. And for sure, you're going to do it early in the process, but you're going to keep doing it. So let's talk a little bit about what that development process looks like and maybe some of the tools and people out there to support that.
Typically, the whole measurement question comes when an organization is either contemplating or has made a commitment to actually go on a journey to improve what's happened. So I think the first thing is the first opportunity for measurement is not only to sort of make sure that it's linked to the strategic plan, to make sure you know what is happening, but also to take an opportunity to understand some of the root causes. So you might have disability leave, you might have a lot of turnover, those are sort of the results of things that are going wrong. But in measurement, there's also an opportunity to do some analysis to see why. So what are the employees' perceived stressors? How do you sort of link to the factors that relate to psychological health in the workplace? And there are tools, Guarding Minds at Work, there's another tool, Total Health Index. There's a number of them on the marketplace that'll help you actually get to that root cause. So that's one thing, because that'll help you understand where to have the investment in terms of where you have problems, but what to invest in, like what to change, what to move forward on. The next group of measurements is not just waiting for the change. So if you wait for your disability to change, or you wait for your absence to go down or your engagement to go up, it's not really enough, because you want to make sure that you're on the right track even before you see outcomes. You want to make sure that if you're not on the right track, that you're able to take corrective action. So there's a type of measurement, which is what a process measurement. So, for example, if one of your objectives is to promote EFAP, to have more people use EFAP because it's been linked to reduced disability costs, you have to track to make sure that that is happening, and you have to take corrective action with communication or whatever if it's not happening. If one of your actions is to train your managers, then you get into another example of a process, of an impact measure, which is, are they actually even paying attention to the training? It's not even, do they attend, but has it changed the way that they're thinking? Has it changed the knowledge? Has it changed behavior? So you have the process measure, the impact measure, and then the next group of measures are your outcome measures, which is, and what's the result at the end? So just a couple of things to think about.
At SOS, one of the things that we look at is, and as Paula alluded to, is the needs assessment. So seeing where you're at so you have something to measure and something to go for. One of the things is, we talked about the simple measurements. That could be as simply as putting up a resource center, a resource pamphlets, and tracking. So many companies put up pamphlets, but then don't track how many are going on the topic of addictions? How many are leaving on family mental health? How many are actually taken on bipolar illness? And just by tracking that, then that company or organization can say, wow, we need some more learning or some more education. So some of those simple measurements really can make huge impact, as well as, starting somewhere. So the needs assessment really helps, or that initial piece, but then there's simple ways before you can see more the bigger, the larger numbers of, has absenteeism changed, or has our benefits costs changed? These are simple things that you could see on a monthly basis even.
I love it. That all sounds so rich and amazing. I'm actually going to build on something that Paula said, talking about the process metrics, which I thought was really interesting. there's an opportunity to even take a step back before we even set a measurement plan and begin at the point of what is the vision for your organization relative to organizational health or mental health or whatever the case may be. And then coupled with that vision, what are your specific objectives? And once you understand those, the measurement part, playing into what both of you are saying, becomes so much easier, because there are organizations out there who really, their vision is simply to be healthiest workforce in Canada or a most attractive place to work. They're looking to tick that box, or maybe they're going through Excellence Canada certification. So whatever is motivating the program, stating that up front and setting very clear objectives, those are some aspirational types of visions and objectives. There are others that are much more specific. We are bleeding on our drug claims experience. We need to do something to get ahead of the health of our employees. So then an obvious metric to that would be the claims experience. So everything from very specific measures tied to these stated objectives, and then some simple measures around engagement, and even how many new employees did, if we're a smaller organization, you probably look at how many new employees did we attract and survey them. Was part of your decision to join this organization, was it tied to our offering in health and wellness or our support for employee mental health? We know employees are saying we want support from our employers. 86% say they want support from their employers with regards to their mental health, and 84% for physical health. So are those drivers playing into the objectives that the employer has, and how do you measure that? So objectives, vision, armed with those, we can come up with a measurement plan.
One thing that we've really experienced we operate a software platform called BestLifeRewarded, where we reward people for engaging, and there really are no sort of immediate results when it comes to health behavior change. So in some cases it's very difficult to measure, because you don't eat an apple today and then you lose 50 pounds tomorrow, unfortunately. So it becomes a long-term sort of measurement on a continuum. So there's some really terrific evidence-based models out there that are proven in thousands of peer-reviewed journals, things like Prochaska's Stages of Health Behavior Change, Keller's Conviction Confidence Modeling, that we can actually look at people's changes on that continuum, that you can look at how that actually projects into outcome level data. And Prochaska's published a number of studies in that area that shows if you move someone from pre-contemplation to contemplation on the stages of health behavior change, that actually translates into projecting an outcomes level result from that. So, there's a bit of, you can't put a direct line A to B in terms of a return on investment or a metric that's going to demonstrate if you do A today, you're going to get X result tomorrow. But I think there's a lot of indicators that we can use to help us to craft programming and support tools and understand how people are moving along that motivation scale or continuum of health behavior change, and really support them through that process.
Wow, these ladies are doing such a fabulous job. There's not much more to add.
I totally agree.
I love all the points that have been raised, and I agree. It's not like an apple today, an improvement tomorrow. It is really on a continuum. We started this journey about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, and I can tell you that first of all, in terms of following a system, it really does have to be chunked down. It does have to be aligned with some kind of strategic plan. And it's not like you're going to stop it tomorrow because you've reached your required goal. It does have to be continuous. And I think the best way to measure that is just to look at your employees and their engagement. It's really important to have engaged employees. Taking surveys is wonderful. We've done that actually as part of the MHCC study, and we found that starting with our baseline and looking at where we are now, there's been an 18% increase in psychological health. And for us, that's big. We're a small company. We're only 16 employees. We have a couple of people respond, and it makes a big difference. It skews the numbers. But it's important that we look around, we talk to people, we engage them, we find out where they're at. I was reading recently that John Deere actually does a morale survey bi-weekly, which I think is an awful lot. That's very, very regular and maybe too much for most organizations. But how many people do that annually even to check in with their employees to see where they're at? So that might be a good place to start, doing surveys, finding out where people are at. As Jen was saying, what's your claims experience? Maybe if dental claims are really high and you check with HR, then maybe you need to have a dental campaign. I know that doesn't have anything to do with mental health, but it's on the same continuum. You have to check and see where people are at with their mental health and be okay to ask. There's such a stigma attached to mental health, and really the only way to overcome that is by starting the dialogue.
A theme that's going through everybody's comments is that the data, it's not so much setting that target necessarily and hitting it, either in the short or the long term. We've heard some of this stuff is really, it's a continuous journey and it lasts throughout the life of the organization. But it is what's going to allow you to iterate and get better. That the data is going to point you in the directions that you need to go. I'm just going to share a quick anecdote. I once worked for an organization and we did the first and a very sweeping workforce census and survey with the folks. And I remember sitting with the team when they first got the results back. And, there was some negative stuff there in terms of the workplace culture and how people were feeling in terms of how they were supported. And the team was really down. They were like, my gosh, we worked so hard to get this survey live and to get it into the organization, and now we're going to go back to the senior management team and give them all this bad news. But when you looked at the survey, it was like over 80% of our entire workforce completed it. It's like you're ignoring the win. Like, that's huge, right? Like, the fact that people are engaged and are willing to tell you, even if it's bad, is good. So it's really about looking at that data from a number of different perspectives. Karen, you wanted to jump in, please do.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that point about the iterative process, and it's really important to look at this work as a change initiative, and that you're really moving and measuring awareness levels and up to trying to move people to understanding. And it takes time, and if it's a large organization, to build that awareness can take quite a lot of time. So you have to manage up front, manage expectations and assumptions around this work so that everyone understands that we're not going to have a mentally healthy workplace in a year. It's going to take time because some people don't understand, right? So you do have to take time and build the awareness very carefully with all employees, help them understand, and then measure that. And measure their awareness, measure their understanding, and measure your leaders' understanding too. And that's really important to keep the work and the momentum going.
So Jodi, what you said about finding the win when it's not obvious brings my mind to some work that Sun Life is doing with Ivy around the ROI, return on investment for workplace wellness programs. And a little bit of a teaser for final results that'll come out later this year, but there's an evaluation of drug claiming patterns relative to workplaces that have a wellness program in place. And early findings are not suggesting a positive ROI tied to drug alone. When we look at absence and productivity, we'll see more favorable results is what is trending, but drugs on their own, not so much. And so looking for the win in that, the research team is looking at what's our hypothesis. We're educating people about health. We're screening people who may not have known that they have an issue with cholesterol or their blood glucose is out of whack. So are people coming onto a medication while others are coming off? And then also recognizing these changes don't happen overnight. To Cynthia's point, it takes more than a 2-year study to show results to something like claiming patterns. But I couldn't agree more with looking for those wins in the analysis and the measurement that you're conducting.
Now, Cynthia, when we were preparing for this panel, you had some really interesting things to say about what you're measuring. And so we've heard mention of return on investment a couple of times. Is that all that you're trying to measure, or what other types of things could be part of that vision you were talking about, Jen, when you're building these metrics?
Yeah, I think Jen made some really important points related to the drug claim data, because really if you're identifying someone that maybe is not at target for blood sugar or high cholesterol, I mean, if they're getting on drug at the right time and they're adherent to it, you're potentially preventing an event down the road, which of course, not only from a quality of life perspective has a gigantic cost, but to the organization as well. There's been a lot of focus on things like under the umbrella of value on investment. So versus return on investment, which typically is a straight financial return on investment. So for every dollar spent on wellness, Harvard reports $3.27 return. That goes up to $6 in some studies, but the net of it is it's always a positive return from an ROI, or return on a financial investment. But what's really interesting now is value on investment, which takes into account things like employee morale, presenteeism, absenteeism, looking at drug claims, looking at overall satisfaction and retention of employees. So it is a wider net in terms of measuring the return of that investment, both human resource and cost-wise, into wellness programming. So it's a multi-pronged approach, I think, that's required for measuring these programs. It cannot be a one-size-that-fits-all. And I think just in the same sense that you want to tie your metrics to your strategic objectives for the organization, really that return is, how does this fit? And where as an organization do we really want to focus those efforts to really determine where's the best return or value that we're getting back for these investments in programming?
I was just really intrigued with Cynthia's comment about the VOI as opposed to the ROI, because very often we're just focused, as we all know, on the bottom line and the bean counters. But at the end of the day, we're speaking about people. And without people, most of us can't do what we're doing. We're not into the industrial age. We're way beyond that. We're not making widgets. We're using our brain. And we need people to do that, and we need to protect people's minds in order to be able to continue doing what we're doing.
That's a really huge point. And, it's important to think about what moves your organizations. And I just noticed that one of the lead articles in the Harvard Business Review was talking about really big projects. A lot of them were infrastructure projects, like really ambitious redevelopment and repurposing of organizations, big dollar budgets, and lots of multidisciplinary teams. Key enabler called out in that article was psychological safety. The ability to say things, for the organization to not react negatively to it, and to take all ideas and really explore what the potential of those ideas might be. And what better way to kind of role model that behavior than having the bravery to actually start measuring some things when you may have a problem, right? And that's what's sparking the initiative. But then it can be a little bit scary to go out and measure it and see your numbers and stare at those. The other really quick important point I just want to make, Paula, and I think you made it originally, which is, sometimes when we gather in these rooms, we have already demonstrated a certain level of awareness and understanding of the importance of mental wellness and that it's an issue. It's really important to understand even just generating and sharing and proliferating that understanding and awareness is huge, because really no success can happen until that grows within an organization. So for sure, we all get it, but it's still a win too when you grow it in your organization. So sorry, Paula, did I see that you wanted to jump in there or no?
One very quick comment, and it actually ties in a couple of the last two. A lot of organizations across the world, Canada being no exception, are really now focused on supporting innovation inside their organizations. There's a lot of disruptive threats. The competitive market is changing at a very rapid pace, and innovation is one of the factors that is known, particularly in this environment, to enable an organization to survive. So when you look at the factors that foster or hinder innovation, there are many, but the one that you took as an example is one of the key ones, which is people feeling the psychological safety to say what's on their minds. Because when you think about it, if you have an idea and you're thinking about all the reasons why people are going to slam you or why it's politically incorrect, you're not going to bring forward that innovation. If you're going through a development process or you're going through a change and something is or is not working, if the organization's culture is such that people don't feel safe in coming forward, there are innumerable examples of billions of dollars and even lawsuits in terms of that being an issue. So that is one example. But if you take the factors of a psychologically healthy workplace, if you take all of them and break them down, it links to business objectives in terms of engagement, innovation, et cetera. So it reinforces the point and hopefully makes it very clear how powerful the conversation is that we're having.
That's fantastic. And I'm wondering if folks could give an example from any part of your experiences of how you can capture these data. Because we've talked about process measures versus outcome measures and what particular goals those measures can be tied to. So for sure, it can be anchored in a number of different things. But it would be really interesting just to hear about the different ways and means of collecting data.
So related to mental health in particular, we have a number of measures that we look at. One is the health risk assessment. So there's a number of questions related to emotional health in there. But what's interesting and has been surprising for us is when you start to look and dive into things like stress as an example, someone suffering from moderate to extreme stress, when you start to look at the reasons they state for that anxiety or stress, it's actually quite interesting. A lot of it's things like financial well-being, which is something that is easier potentially to address versus something that would be down the path of a depression. Financial well-being can be education modules, building financial literacy, providing tools. So those things become sort of a quick win in the program. So we capture that. We also capture on a daily basis, people get incentivized to track their mood, to track their stress, their pain. Every number of health measures is included, as well as over time their stage of health behavior change and their conviction confidence level related to modifiable risk factors. So in that case, if it's a measure, let's call it anxiety, we will every 30 days look at what is your conviction, meaning how important is it to you to change your lifestyle related to your anxiety level, and secondarily, how confident are you that you can actually do something about that? And then every 30 days we're measuring that so we can look at if there's movement along that continuum to improve people's both sort of getting there in terms of actually taking action and doing something and feeling confident about it. So there's lots of metrics that don't necessarily say this person is going to be prevented from having a situation in their life, but it helps us, it gives us indicators that we can then provide support tools to address some of those areas of concern.
I'll give another example of a survey theme to measurement, and one that kind of gets a little more in the weeds once you're a little further down the path with programming. It's really key to include in your wellness programs surveys to the employees as to the value that they gained from the program. And what that allows us to do is to really isolate those intangibles, that VOI you spoke of. We want to make sure we never discount, and in fact, we showcase those employee testimonials and those stories. Because when it comes to gaining support, first building support and then gaining support for a strategy, a workplace health and wellness strategy, whether it's mental health or whatever the focus is, when you can see employees emerging with their stories saying, for example, I attended a screening clinic and I had no idea that I was in serious trouble, my life was actually saved. If I hadn't gone to the hospital, or engaged with my doctor, I was a heart attack waiting to happen. Or using an example of a health challenge, I needed that social support, that peer, when it comes to behavior change theory, that peer involvement to be able to make and sustain a change. And I have changed my habits over the course of 6 months or a year, and these changes are with me. It's been life-altering, not just for me, but for my family. So I think surveying people and pulling out those personal stories brings a whole lot of color and extra weight to the measurement that you're doing with your programs, and helps to secure that buy-in that we need to keep the programs going.
And if I could, I'm going to add a twist to that as well, just to talk about how the type of tools or how we capture data for one group of people or one set of people is going to be very different than someone else. So one thing that we found is that we go out to companies and they have people that are on the road working on trucks compared to the people that sit in an office or admin or in accounting. And the way they learn about mental health, the way that we capture data from those two different groups of people is very different. So it's looking at different ways to capture data so that you get a cross culture, because some of the people that work on the road every day in their orange perhaps do not sit very well with a 50 question survey. So how do you capture data with those particular people? And also on the return on value, it's the stories that are told in your company. So when a leader says, hey, I went to the training thinking I was going to help my employees, and then they say, but I was the one that reached out to EAP that night, that's huge success and win. So it's looking at being very creative with how you capture the data, but then how you share it with the company.
I agree with what everyone's saying, and it's really important to build off those stories too, those testimonials that you do hear from employees, and encourage them to share them, and maybe sometimes draw from those employees to be your champions. And they have passion around this work and want to be involved. Not always, but it's important to really leverage those stories. Those are what are the most meaning to other employees in the organization, is to hear from others. It opens the conversations, people start to talk, and it just breaks down some of those barriers.
So let me ask then, who typically owns this data, and what are some good strategies for how you share it, right? Is it something that goes to your management team? Is it, are you penetrating the whole organization? Is it important that it go to the senior management team first? What are some key takeaways for folks who are probably from organizations of all different sizes here?
It's really important that you do take a systematic approach. So even if you're a small organization or a large organization, you build it into a systematic management approach. Someone's assigned, there's responsibility, accountability, and depending on the size of the organization, in a large organization, the wellness committee could have a huge responsibility and a mandate around some of this work, and as the sponsor of that, the executive sponsor, taking the information up to the leadership team. In a smaller organization, it's important that the work is assigned and there is accountability, and that it's systematic, and the data is looked at and it's informed and shared out with others.
Exactly. And just as a matter of sort of structure and process, number one, it's important that whoever collects the data and puts together any dashboard is very mindful of confidentiality, because we are talking about personal health issues, physical and mental health issues, as well as things that are related to the workplace. So that's one important point. But there are different audiences. So the same data could have a different focus, a different level of detail, depending on the ability of the recipient to do something about it. So I absolutely think it's critical for the senior leadership team to have a dashboard in terms of what's going on in the organization. And it's my view as well that has to be built into a standing agenda in terms of the leadership group. Now, the reason for that is that if it's a one-time sort of a thing, a project, and it goes away, then you won't have the attention and visibility to actually sustain whatever is moving forward. And the other thing, from a very practical business reason, is in many ways, in many kind of forums, and we can actually take up days making this point to you, it's linked to the business success. And it's the responsibility of the organization's senior leadership team to attend to whatever links to business success, so making it part of the agenda. And then cascade from there, from a director even down to a manager level in terms of being a larger group, providers. Again, we can't go into all the detail now, but different levels of detail depending on the ability of the recipient to do something about it.
I love what you said, Paula, especially around, you know, having the top leadership or the executive as part of the whole program. We work with a company right now. We've worked with them for 3 years, and they have about 300 staff. And it is amazing to see what happens when you go in, because there's a couple of strong advocates for mental health and workplace mental health. Usually HR is a good starting place. But the executives came to the trainings because they recognized it's not just about the workplace, it's about their families, their friends, their community. And then just to share to the success is that the executive have now asked, and we're going tomorrow, because the executive are going to present an award to the mental health committee for the work they've done over the last year. So it's important that the whole organization is a part of that in their different ways. And you know, it's one of those things too that once you have some stories to share, they can be posted in different ways, and they can be shared in different ways. So customization, fluidity, as far as keep assessing where things are at, are really important to see that.
So I would add, along the theme of holding leaders accountable, and this doesn't always work, but something we've seen work really, really well is before we create a reporting, a systematic approach to reporting, we look at what's the business already reporting on? What are their KPIs or key performance indicators that are already in place? And how do they report on those monthly, quarterly, annually? And if there's enough of a voice at that senior leadership table related to the health and wellness strategy, then there's a good chance of getting the health and wellness objectives of the organization into those KPIs and those reporting routines that already exist. And then what we can really enjoy is, because we're talking in a language that resonates and is very relevant to the senior leadership team, it becomes all that easier to gain the buy-in and support for the approach.
That's an excellent point, because I think one of the things that we all suffer from is data overload as well, where we get, you know, completely overwhelmed with the amount and level and how to interpret and the analytics and all those different things. So if you can tie it into existing KPIs or existing sort of metrics for the organization, it I think simplifies the process, and over time you can become more sophisticated with it, but we don't want to be paralyzed with too much data, which happens a lot, I think. You don't even know where to start. So it's really identifying those simple things that tie into the existing business, I think is absolutely key.
Yeah, Addie, I'm super excited to hear about what your experience has been as you've been going through the implementation of the standards.
So can I just respond on that one as well?
Yeah,
okay,
please
sure.
do.
Great. And that's a great point about data. Everyone these days seems to be really fixated on big data and big collection of big data. What's really important beyond the data is what is being done with it. And for example, what we do as a small organization is with the values and looking at the survey results is that senior management will look at that first and say, okay, there's some gaps here, and what are we going to do about it? And then look at what implementations we're going to put forward to the staff. So again, I'm not going to use an example, but if there's a psychological issue, say one of the psychosocial factors, the 13 workplace factors, where the results are a little low, we'll then look at that and say, okay, we need to do something, implement some program where we can bring this level up or where we can improve things, because clearly there's a gap here for staff. So that's something that for me is very important, and that along with providing the information on these surveys, we actually look at some strategic plan to overcome that gap. In terms of implementation, again, one of the advantages of being small is that we can be really nimble, and we can, we can do things pretty quickly on the fly to, hey, let's go out for drinks tonight, and, we've got people pretty much engaged. Who doesn't want to go for a drink after work? And we actually there's two people who've just taken it upon themselves. They're administrators, and they love each other. They've both just started at the same time, and really just hit it off. And so they've now become the social coordinators. So starting tomorrow, they're doing a cocktails and canvas. So that's tomorrow night, then July. So they put together a social calendar for the rest of the year. And because we're also a very giving organization and we're all about charity, a lot of that has been incorporated and tied into charity, which for me just really speaks to my heart, because that's part of my values. So it's great to see that I didn't have to do anything as the leader to implement that. It just has somehow carried through. But we all know that there's great value in giving as well, and that makes us feel good. And if we can have a group of people in an organization or employees doing that, how wonderful is that?
That's great. So I think the sort of overarching themes that we've heard today are big or small. You can engage in this and still learn a lot about your organization, and find new pathways or better pathways to achieving what you want to achieve from a business perspective. That there's lots of supports out there for if you do want to pursue a mental wellness program and to rigorously look at it and measure it, because if we don't measure it, we're not managing it. There's lots of supports out there to do that, from standards as well as people and organizations who are willing to work with you on this. And this is a great initiative that can really be owned by everyone in the organization. Regardless of level in the organization, there's a role for everyone to play. And interestingly enough, when we talked about employee engagement at our last panel, that was for sure a key theme, that there was a role for employee champions. There was definitely a role for managers to increase I really love this term, what somebody described as human literacy. That every manager needs human literacy. It's not mental health or physical health literacy, it's human literacy. And that it doesn't have to be difficult. That there are some simple metrics that can be tracked, and in fact, it's important when you're thinking about that buy-in to maybe not scare people away through data overload as you embark on this process. I invite you to join me in thanking our panelists for what was really a fantastic discussion where I personally learned a lot, and I hope you all did too.